We need to get the message out that if you do succumb to the temptation to shoot, then we will end up uh, penalizing you, maybe even sending you to prison, because obviously the average police officer does not want to end up going to prison where they will be spending time with folks they may have put in prison themselves. So I am very hopeful that we can get people to think twice before they pull out a gun.
The man you just heard and the man that you're looking at now, that is the newly elected at the time Franklin County Prosecutor Gary Tyack. And those were his words when asked how he's going to handle the job of being the prosecutor for the county of Franklin in Ohio. I'm going to read that again just so we can be crystal clear on what he's saying. We need to get the message out that if you do succumb to the temptation to shoot, then we will end up penalizing you. Maybe even send you to prison, because obviously the average police officer does not want to end up in prison. That is Franklin County Prosecutor Gary Tyack. He is going to be the subject of today's video. Alrighty, so for today's video, what I've done is Gary Tyack, who was a former judge in Franklin County, was recently elected to be the county prosecutor. What he did is he replaced longtime county prosecutor Ron O'Brien in Franklin County. Ron O'Brien was the prosecutor for 24 years, from 1997 to 2021. And in the Summer of Love, which was 2020, where politicians were kind of making a name for themselves as being the ones who are going to be the people who reform the police and bring justice and equality to the world. That is the environment that Gary Tyack used to get himself elected. And one of the things that he ran on was that he has a mission to prosecute police officers whenever he believes that, I don't know, whenever, I don't really know what's going through his head. But he did an interview with 10 TV reporter Lacey Crisp. I've gone ahead and clipped out all the crazy bits and put them in a line. So I'm going to play the interview for you that I've got kind of snipped up. And then I'll come back in, we'll talk about what we've seen, and we're going to kind of go from there. So grab some popcorn and enjoy some of the wackadoodle stuff that comes out of Gary Tyack's mouth.
Well, my way of managing the office is going to be a little bit different. I don't view my job as being a trial lawyer or being a trial prosecutor. I view my job as being an office manager for a very large firm. I mean, there's 300 people or so that work for this office. And I don't need to end up seeing my face on the TV or in a newspaper to feel like I'm a success. A success is managing the 100-some lawyers and the miscellaneous staff to handle the cases fairly and expeditiously, and to let the people in the county feel that their case has been fairly heard. We've had entirely too many cases where I think one population, especially the Black population, feels that maybe their case wasn't fairly heard if the person who shot them was a police officer. So I'm going to try to address these things.
I want to ask you about that. When we talked right after you were elected, you had said you ran because not enough police officers were being prosecuted for shooting and killing Black men. We've had 2 fatal law enforcement involved shootings in the month of December. How do you feel you plan on proceeding with those cases, and do you still stand behind those comments?
I stand behind the comments, and I happen to believe that we need to get the message out. I mean, 95% or more of the police officers go through a career and never shoot anyone. We need to get the message out that if you do succumb to the temptation to shoot, then we will end up penalizing you, maybe even sending you to prison, because obviously the average police officer does not want to end up going to prison where they will be spending time with folks they may have put in prison themselves. So I am very hopeful that we can get people to think twice before they pull out a gun. And it's only recently with the different kinds of pictures taken by cell phones and other things that the officers realize that what they do is going to result in a crime or a criminal conviction. And that's something we have that may cut down on some of the shootings.
I have to ask you about that choice of words, temptation. Do you think officers are choosing to shoot, or do you think they're doing it to protect their own lives?
I think that they believe they're doing it to protect their own lives, but it is still a choice.
What is your number one goal, and what is your thing you think is going to be the biggest hurdle and biggest challenge in taking this position on?
I think the biggest challenge is going to be reducing the number of guns and the amount of gun violence in Franklin County, and it keeps growing. I mean, when I first started to run, there was one number, and then the last half of the year, we just had shooting after shooting after shooting, and I think we've got to get people out of the mindset that that's the way to solve a problem. So I think gun violence in Franklin County is probably going to be the single biggest challenge. The other thing is the legislature has just made murder convictions more complicated by basically saying that if you think you're in danger, even if you weren't in danger, that's a situation where you can shoot somebody. The changes the legislature made in this statute, if you really read them and then think about what that means on the streets, those are very distressing changes to the Ohio law.
Alrighty, so there's a lot to unpack there. And I took some notes. So I want to go kind of step by step through the interview and give my reaction to some of the stuff that he had to say. Beginning right off, he said, "My job as the county prosecutor is going to be more of a manager and not a trial attorney." What he's saying there is that the previous prosecutor, Ron O'Brien, he was well known and well regarded as a trial attorney. Some of the biggest cases that the county had, he took it upon himself to actually be in the courtroom and make sure that he tried those cases. Gary Tyack, there's some questions about his health, but I'm not going to go there. He's not going to be in the courtroom. And then one of the other things he did is he took a swipe at Ron O'Brien for being a prolific trial attorney, which for some reason in Gary Tyack's mind, that's a bad thing. And he said, I'm not going to judge my success on the number of headlines and TV appearances and stuff I get. That's because Ron O'Brien has made quite a few national TV appearances with some of the cases he's tried, and not just in recent memory, but over the years. There's actually a Netflix documentary called The Monster Inside, and that was about a serial rapist in the Columbus area that was targeting Ohio State students. So Gary Tyack has a problem with Ron O'Brien gaining notoriety for being a prosecutor that prosecutes cases. That was one of the first things. Then he went on to say that he wants to make sure cases are handled fairly, because previously he didn't think that citizens who were black that got shot by police officers had their cases handled fairly. He's basically saying that the prosecutor before him, Ron O'Brien, had a racial bias against black people, and that if he wasn't so racist, then more police officers would have been put in prison. Then he gets into this quote that I've got up on the screen here. He says, "We want to get the message out that if you do succumb to the temptation to shoot, then we will end up penalizing you, maybe even send you to prison, because obviously the average police officer doesn't want to end up in prison." It's funny that he takes over as prosecutor of an entire county, and the county that he took over for is experiencing a tremendous rise in violent crime. And his sole focus seems to be on police officers. And what he's doing is he's demonstrating an overall lack of understanding of, one, what a police officers are going through when they're out on these scenes and they do get involved in a shooting. I just posted one the other day where officers were in a foot chase with a guy. The guy fell down. As he fell, he had a gun in his hand, rolled towards the officer, and the officer shot him. In Gary Tyack's mind, does he think that the officer gave in to the temptation to shoot in that case? I would really like to hear what he had to say, because I've heard multiple interviews with him, and I'm going to give you a little, what's the word I'm looking for? A little preview. After this commentary, there's another interview that comes up. Almost a year later, he was interviewed, and he said the same stupid things. It's almost like he doesn't believe that there's ever a case for officers to use deadly force, and he even mentions it in this video too. When the reporter said, "Hey, I want to step back and say you used the word temptation. I want to ask what your thoughts on that, because often officers are saying that they have to use deadly force to defend themselves and defend others." And he gives this like smart ass remark. He says, "I think the officers believed that they had to use deadly force." Well, go ahead and tell me, Gary, if somebody has a gun in their hand and they turn towards me, is that sufficient evidence for me to believe that I'm in imminent danger? Or am I supposed to let them shoot before I shoot? Do I have to take a round before I'm allowed to defend myself? I want to know where the line is. Oh, and then he went on to talk a little bit about, that was one of the other things he said too, is that he's talking about this rise in crime, and he said that by him prosecuting police officers, that's going to change people's persona of what's going on with society, and that's going to cause people to stop shooting each other, which is absolutely just freaking hilarious. And then, if he hadn't said enough stupid stuff already, he had to take a swipe at stand your ground laws by saying the Ohio legislature has made it more difficult to prosecute homicide cases going forward. That's bullshit. You know, the stand your ground law is one of the most misunderstood and maligned concepts I've ever heard. I've been a police officer for more than a decade. I've seen, I don't know, more than a handful of justified shootings that most people would think you would need a stand your ground law in order to reinforce. One specifically, this was years ago. This guy went to a neighborhood, picked up a prostitute. The prostitute said, "Hey, I've got a perfect spot where it's nice and secluded. We can do our thing and no one's going to bother us." So she tells the guy where to drive. He ends up driving into a dead-end alley. When they pull into the alley, he realizes he's being ambushed. People come out from both sides of his cars with weapons, and this prostitute was setting him up to be robbed. She jumped out of the car and ran. He was a concealed carry permit holder. He drew his weapon, fired and killed one of the people, and then shot the other person before he backed his car down the alley, went to a safe place, and called for the police. Stand your ground laws didn't change that case at all. And stand your ground law is not going to change the majority of cases. To come out and say that they're making it harder to prosecute homicides because of that is, frankly, it's laughable. Because the majority of homicides that we deal with is just it's a couple people angry and one person pulls out a gun and shoots the other. And to say that that makes it harder to prosecute cases, all he's doing is he's making excuses for his future failures, and it's pathetic. In case you were wondering how I really thought, I'm giving it to you today. Now, I mentioned before, about a year later, he did another interview, and I do have some clips from that. So let's play that now, and then we'll tie everything up.
The biggest problem is that the crime wave in Central Ohio just doesn't seem to be abating, and we've got to be responsible for it. One of the big changes that our office makes is that we're willing to consider charging a police officer who shoots somebody and shouldn't have, and we feel it's our job to let the community know, especially the African American community, that they are not fair game for a police officer.
He was elected.
All right, so the first interview that I played for you, that was recorded in January 2021. That was the day that he took office as the Franklin County prosecutor. And while he was running for prosecutor, homicides went from, from 2019 to 2020, they went from 106 to 177. So the county had just experienced its largest increase in homicides in history. Now, that year, the year 2021, because this other interview was given in November of 2021. So he'd been in office for 11 months, or maybe 10 months and a couple of days. I don't know the actual date. But in 2021, the county also broke the all-time homicide record, smashing that by another 30. So the previous record was set in 2017, and the city of Columbus alone added almost 60 to that number, which is approximately double what it is on an average year. He was asked how he's going to handle this rise in crime, and his response once again was to come out and say he needs to prosecute police officers and all that other stuff. Of the 202 homicides that happened in the city of Columbus in 2021, please tell me how many of those would have been prevented if you put a police officer in prison. When you have that answer, please send me an email. I would really like to know. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I've given you plenty of thoughts for today. And I don't know. We're just going to call it there. So thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.